before, of course, that became like a national park.
Mm-hmm.
And so the story is, the government came in and tried to buy that land up because they wanted to turn it into national park. But there were people who lived there before. So she was, one of the settlers down there. And she was 13 when she was married, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And so what I've been told, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that, she was, growing up, whatever, down there, and that what would be my great-grandpa, but your grandfather, happened to be down there and saw her, and she caught his eye, and he found out who she was, and then kind of courted her a couple of times, but not many. I mean, it wasn't like they dated for years.
Well, I guess that was a really far walk or ride on a donkey or a mule.
Well, yeah, because that would have been...
Yeah.
So that would have probably been a good, 8, 9, 10 miles from where he lived.
Rich Cove.
To Cataloochee, yeah.
Or farther.
So they met a few times, and then they were married. And he was like 19.
I believe he was 19.
And she was 13. But that was normal back then.
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
That wasn't like uncommon.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely not. And he could have been 18 and she 13, because when I think about their ages. But she was already, for the most part, running a household.
Yeah.
She took care of her many brothers and sisters. She had several siblings, and she already, ran that household and did all the cooking and the laundry and,
Was basically like a mother.
Absolutely. So she knew exactly what she was doing before she should have been doing it.
And that was really common for a lot of those mountain families. They had really large families, lots of kids, and the kids were responsible, like the older kids, for taking care of the younger kids, because usually mom and dad were out in the field working or farming, doing that kind of stuff. And Daddy Rich, he was a logger. Mm-hmm. We have some really cool photos of him, like from probably about the 30s, with these really old trucks and these big, huge logs. I mean, probably 8 feet tall, wide, the diameter. I mean, just huge. And 3 or 4 men standing in front of him, and these, trees are just giant.
And he was gone from home for like weeks at a time. And so my grandmother, at the time, she didn't have a vehicle, and she had 6 kids. And, I mean, she worked, and all of her children, my uncles, aunts, my mom, will tell you, how hard they worked. I mean, they would go up on the mountain and cut trees down and drag them down to their house using a donkey. And they all had jobs and got up early and worked before they went to school.
Yeah, I remember Nana telling me a story about, I guess she was in charge of the eggs, right? Mm-hmm. And so that was her job every morning, was to get up and go to the hen house and pick the eggs up and all that. And she had told me some story about how she had started like stashing an egg a day away until she had her like a dozen eggs, and she went to the store and traded those eggs for some bananas. But they were green bananas, they weren't ripe, and she ate them and they made her sick or something, and that Granny found out and like I guess made her eat all of them as punishment.
Because that's what she did, was took the eggs to the store to get coffee and sugar. And she said she saved a few back, but got her a little treat.
Major trouble about that. Yeah, because the Granny was like, "You stole. That's stealing.
That's being dishonest."
Yeah.
And talking about the kids watching their younger siblings, my mom was number 5, and my uncle was number 6, and he's probably 2.5 years younger than her. But even though that's really relatively close in age, she would have to watch him while they were in the fields working gardens, and Granny would spread out a big blanket, and tell my mom, who was probably, let's just say she was 3.5 and he might have been 18 months old, something like that. Y'all can't leave this blanket. Do not leave this blanket. Do not let your brother leave this blanket. And I mean, we would never leave a child under the age of 4 babysitting an 18-month-old now. But back then, that kind of was typical and common, and I'm assuming that maybe they were more mature because they were capable of babysitting. But she tells stories of how she used to just beat him. She said she hated him because when he was born, she was jealous. And he says he remembers it, that she said the minute They called her Mommy, my granny, their mother. The minute Mommy was out of sight, Dorothy would fly in beating me because she just didn't like him and resented him.
She sounds like she was a brat.
She was.
I mean,
she says she
well,
was.
she's told me. I mean, she's like, oh yeah, I was a horrible kid. Like, I was just hell on wheels. I was a terrible kid. I was mean as hell. Like, she's told me this. And, I mean, frankly, let's face it, Nana's still mean as hell.
But she's still mean as hell. And she'll do something
But her siblings...
Oh, yeah.
I remember, and this has been, before, like, my great-aunt Frances passed away, and my Aunt Ruby and all them, and George, one night, stopping down there at my Aunt Frances's, because she lived below you for some years, and having dinner with them, and she would make fried green tomatoes, and they were so delicious, and she'd always have stewed, like, canned tomatoes.
Frances was the best
She
cook.
Was. And so anytime she would be like, come on in and eat, I was like, absolutely. That's a hard yes.
Don't have to ask twice.
But just sitting down with them, and we started kind of talking about because I'm fascinated by these stories, and started asking them questions. And it was so funny to listen to 4 siblings, George, Johnny, Frances, Ruby, all talk about my Nana. And how she was the worst kid. They were like, she was absolutely horrible. She went out of her way to get in trouble. Just terrible.
Yes,
and a
she
bully.
laughs about it.
And just mean as hell.
And even now, when she's mean as hell at age 78, she'll say, I did ABCD, and I'll say, Mom, why did you do that? Or, oh my word, because it's something that caused some sort of conflict or chaos or hard feelings or argument. Or just mean.
Yeah.
What? Why? What made you do that or whatever? She'll say, because I could.
I know. I've heard her say
because I can.
So, yeah, I've heard a lot of stories about Nana growing up and how she just, that she
and
was
at some point,
sort
my
of
grandpa
terrorized
had
poor
something.
Johnny.
I don't think it was chicken pox, but it was some illness that's typically a childhood illness.
Okay.
But something they probably didn't have vaccinations for at the time, or he hadn't had it or whatever. So he's in the bed like very, very, very ill, and cannot even raise up out of bed. Well, she swears that he hated her, but I'm sure that she literally made his life a living hell, her father. But anyway, she laughs about taunting him. And she said that he would try to raise up and reach her to slap her, but he was so sick that he couldn't move. And she said, she just delighted in knowing that he was miserable and she was torturing him.
Damn, Nana.
And then when my grandmother came in or whatever from the barn, Mom said that he said, Naomi, I want you to whoop her ass. Gosh, she's something. She's feisty.
Well, that's a euphemism for what it is.
She said they used to get brown paper bags, and they'd go out in the barn and pull off a tobacco leaf, and while they were drying, but still, anybody that's never worked tobacco, I'm explaining to you that they were still far, far, far from being smoking tobacco.
Oh, yeah.
And she would take this leaf, they would take a leaf and not crumble it or anything, just take the leaf and roll it up in a brown paper bag. Makes me think of like a lettuce wrap, and smoke that.
Okay. The most ghetto cigarette ever.
That could explain the
Hillbilly,
oxygen tank she drags around to this day.
Well, I guess she got.
But she was a child. She was like a little child.
Why would she want
smoking
to smoke
because she's her, because she can.
Because
she could.
And so one of the things that I always found interesting, because I remember Daddy Rich, and he was definitely a character, to put it nicely.
Now that's my grandpa, your great grandpa.
My great grandpa.
For whatever reason, we called him Daddy Rich, but his last name was Rich, but Daddy Rich.
Yeah, so Daddy Rich, I remember some things about him. Like, I remember one time he had killed a groundhog and was dressing it, like, on the porch in front of me, and I was little, and it, traumatized me. Because it's like this groundhog, and he's just gutting it and cutting it up. And I was just like, why are you doing that? And he's like, 'cause I'm going to eat it.
Because you never saw this country lifestyle.
Well,
so I can see.
I mean, to an extent, but
yeah. I mean, you visited your grandparents and saw them doing it, but you didn't grow up that way,
right?
So, I'm sure to see this little furry critter.
Well, yeah, because it was I mean, my dad was a hunter, and I mean, I remember he would kill deer and he would dress the deer, and I mean, I remember seeing that and knowing that, like, we would eat that sometimes. But the groundhog, that was just something that was so foreign to me because we didn't eat groundhog.
No.
And it's this cute, furry little creature, and I've always been like, oh, what a cute, chubby groundhog. And then Daddy Rich has got this bloody fur ball, just tearing it apart, gutting it, big old knife, just like, yeah, and then says he's gonna eat it. And I was like, what?
But at least by then, he had rigged up a pulley system. When I was little, I got to hold its back legs while he would, like, rip the skin, the hide downward, and I can still hear that tearing sound.
Yeah.
It wasn't pleasant.
But he was funny because, like, he had chickens, and where he lives, there was a road that separated, like, his house, and then on the other side of the road was the tobacco barn and the regular barn, and that's where the chickens were.
Pig pen.
Yeah. But
the meat, the smokehouse, all that was on the other side of the road
right.
from the
So you
house.
have to cross the road, and it was a little 2-lane road, not heavily trafficked or anything. But those chickens, I mean, I remember as a kid, he would yell at them and be like, you better not cross that road.
And they kind of obeyed.
Yeah. But if they did, he would, like, shoot them.
Because that side of the road was like the farm, more or less, and then this side's our home. But chickens are going to be chickens.
Well,
they don't
yeah.
see boundaries, yeah.
But he treated them like they were human.
And
like
the
they
occasional...
knew, like they knew better. And if they disobeyed, they got punished. And when I say punished, I mean he'd, like, shoot them.
And why does the chicken cross the road? Occasionally one would find out.
Well,
wouldn't it?
Well, yeah, it was a major lesson in life.
Oh, yeah.
Life-ending lesson.
Yeah, life-ending. It was a lesson for the other ones. That one didn't know anything.
Well, that brings me to this. So we were talking about words that, like, people maybe that aren't from around this area, they're not familiar with the local color, the local language, because haint is one of those, which is a ghost, a haint. Paint is another one, which would be like panther, but old timers call them paints. But you said dittler, and that's a word that not a lot of people know. Because you asked me if I knew, and I said, well, isn't that like a baby chick? But you asked Dylan, and he was like, didn't know what that was. Didn't he say something goofy?
A lot of locals that have grown up here that are my age and less don't know what that means. But locals from here that are older than myself, and some my age, definitely know what that means. Like, that was just part of our daily vocabulary.
Yeah.
A baby chick, a dittler.
And so Granny had purchased some dittlers. So tell them the story about the dittlers and the hen, because I think it's a funny story.
Well, they took these spools, like cable comes on, these huge wooden spools, very large, and they would lay them on their side, and then he would take chicken wire and go around them, so it would make a cage.
Yeah.
But, like a circular cage.
Yeah.
And so it was really large. Well, she'd gotten these dittlers and she put them in there. So they're running a circle around and around and around.
Yeah.
And so she puts a hen in there. And I guess she had done this many times. I probably didn't pay attention to it as much as this time, because this time left me somewhat traumatized. But the hen would run from the chicks, or the dittlers. So the hen, was just running around and around in a circle because it's on that spool.
And the dittlers were like
they were following her, and she just ran and ran and ran. Well, there were like I noticed there was like these a little bit of bickering back and forth between my grandparents, which really we didn't hear very often. So I knew things were kind of getting heated, or something big was getting ready to happen. Suddenly, Daddy Rich, as I called him, jerked that hen out of there. And I'd seen him do this before. But he would grab these chickens, and he would grab them around their, I guess, torso. And so in doing that, he'd hold their wings down so they couldn't do what's called flogging.
Yeah.
And so he'd hold their wings down, and he would just whack their heads against these poles, which were beams. Weight-bearing beams, but they were just made out of like logs.
Yeah.
He would just beat their heads against those. Well, it was disturbing.
Oh yeah.
But this particular time, as disturbing as it was, I was giggling inside, because he's beating that chicken, slamming it up against my granny, saying, "Lee, Lee, what are you doing? And I remember she said, that's my best laying hen.
So she was upset about her laying hen.
She was. She said, that's my best laying hen.
But
so
she